This video is sponsored by Classic Football Shirts, the best place to get your classic and vintage football shirts. To get cheap retro Palace shirts, click the link in the description below. And for an extra 10% off, use the code CFSPJ10 at checkout. Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenborough, and in today's podcast, I'll be looking over the game against Tottenham by bringing my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson and Wayne Hennessy after the game. So let's begin. Palace's wait for a home win this season continues as Juan Foyth's goal handed Tottenham Hotspur victory at Selhurst Park. The Argentinian defender popped up to score his first Spurs goal midway through the second half in an encounter that won't live long in their memory as Mauricio Pochettino won his 7th straight league game against the Eagles. In contrast to the gloomy skies and relentless rain surrounding Selhurst, the Eagles began brightly but couldn't find a way to test Hugo Lloris, with ex-Spurs man Andros Townsend's shot into the side netting after a quarter of an hour, proving to be Palace's best opportunity of a quiet opening 45 minutes. As it progressed, the chances began to pile up for the visitors, starting with Moussa Sissoko barging past 3 players before a diving block by Mamadou Sakho inside the area ended the threat as his countryman pulled the trigger. Dele Alli then rejected a chance to meet a header and instead attempted to set up Harry Kane but miscued. And soon after, the England captain himself pounced on some hesitation by Luka Milivojevic to drive a shot on target from 25 yards, but Hennessy produced a decent stop. That ensured the teams went into the break goalless after a half that was as bleak as the weather. But 8 minutes after play resumed, the hosts had a great chance to take the lead when James Tompkins met a Milivojevic corner at the back post, but he couldn't direct it towards the target. However, in keeping with the game, Spurs took the lead in scrappy fashion on 65 minutes. After winning a corner, Eric Lamela sent it into the box and Kane saw a header blocked on the line. But with the ball up for grabs, everyone hesitated except Foyth, who buried a header to score his first goal in English football. It took Hodgson's team a while to recover from that setback, but eventually they began to build up a head of steam in an attempt to salvage a point. On 79 minutes, Lloris was forced into his first real save of the game when Jeffrey Slupp attempted a 25-yard blast which the World Cup winner pushed to safety, and then a few moments later a sustained period of pressure saw Townsend hit the ball goalwards, but it was comfortable for the Spurs shot stopper. But as the clock ticked into 90 minutes, a huge opportunity was squandered as a Milivojevic shot ricocheted off Foyth and into the path of Alexander Sorloth, and he had time to steady himself but shot straight at Lloris from close range as Palace's hopes of a point disappeared. It was a familiar story for Crystal Palace on Saturday night as they lost out against one of the top 6 sides in the Premier League despite a decent performance. Juan Foyth's second half header was enough to seal all 3 points for Tottenham at Selhurst Park, although Palace had their moments in the game and will feel hard done by not to claim at least a point from the game. But Palace were left with plenty to ponder after slipping to a 5th defeat in 6 league games, leaving them just outside of the bottom 3 on goal difference. There are many talking points arising from the game. Here are some of them. The record without Zaha continues. When the teams were announced and Wilfried Zaha was not in the Palace side, there was a familiar feeling for Eagles fans. The Eagles have not won in the Premier League without their talisman since September 2016, and although Palace put up a good fight against Spurs, it was the same story as they lost out once again without Zaha, making it 13 defeats in a row without their talisman. Another case of deja vu. There were similarities between this game and the defeat against Spurs last season. The scoreline of course was one of them, with this being the 5th successive 1-0 defeat against Spurs for Palace and the 7th league defeat in a row against the North London side. But just like last year, the Spurs goal came from a header and not long after James Tompkins had left the pitch. Last year he went off with cramp just moments before Harry Kane nodded in the late winner, and here it was Juan Foyth who netted his first career goal with a header from close range. The goal, like 25 of the last 26 in games between the two sides, came in the second half, with only 1 strike in the first half in the last 15 matches. Max Meyer. The German midfielder was given his 3rd start in the Premier League as he kept his place in the side after the 3-1 defeat against Chelsea. but once again he failed to last 90 minutes as he was substituted for Jeffrey Slarp shortly after Tottenham scored their goal. The 23-year-old was largely anonymous in the game, and Palace fans are still waiting to see the best of the former Schalke midfielder. The improved atmosphere. Throughout the game, the Palace fans were in good voice under the lights at Selhurst Park. From a rousing chorus of Roy Hodgson's Red and Blue Army to vocal backing as Palace pushed for an equaliser, the Selhurst faithful made plenty of noise. Sadly, it was not enough to spur the team on to a positive result against Tottenham, but there were signs that the famous Selhurst Park atmosphere was getting back to how it was, even without the Homesdale fanatics. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. And also, if you're on Facebook, do feel free to join our Facebook group, which is a really great place to join with discussions and also share your opinions with other fans. And if you are someone like myself who likes to go onto forums and basically not only likes to get into discussions with others, but likes to obviously read what others are saying, just so you can sort of compare their opinion to your own, then of course I'd highly recommend you do join the Facebook group. Now likewise, if you are someone who wants to keep up to date with all the latest Palace news, whether that be news articles, transfer rumours, or whether that be just anything about the club, and that can even include sort of our general opinions about the club as a page. But if you are someone who wants to keep up to date and just wants another Palace account to follow, then of course you can follow us on both our Twitter and Facebook pages at Crystal Palace. Now another great place for you to share your opinion is in the YouTube comments, so if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10, with obviously 10 being the best. And even if you are a Tottenham fan, or even if you are a Palace fan and you don't want to comment below with your player ratings, then of course do feel free to share just your general views of the game. And that's basically so that obviously I give you my views in the podcast and you guys listen to it, but rather than obviously me just giving it to you, I'd much rather like to read your comments and basically compare how your opinion comes to mine, because of course there's going to be things that I say that you might not agree with. So if you are someone who's got a different opinion to me, then of course feel free to drop that below, so obviously I can read it and see what other fans thought about the game, but also any other fans, whether they be Palace or Tottenham fans who come to the video, not only will they listen to my views in the podcast, but also they can read the comment section and basically just sort of build a more broader view of the game as a whole. And especially with a few of the player ratings in particular, I think they're going to be I suppose a few differences, let's put it that way, between mine and some other people. So I suppose in that respect there's going to be a lot of discussion to have there. So if you are someone who wants to get involved, then of course feel free to drop a comment below, obviously with your player ratings. And even if you don't want to do that, just comment below with your general thoughts about the game, or even what you think of the current sort of situation at Palace and what you think might happen in the in the coming weeks. Now of course, if you do want to follow any of the social media pages that I've already mentioned or join the Facebook group, then do check all links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, starting in goal with Wayne Hennessy, who once again, like I said, week in week out now, he's a very consistent player, and once again he had a very steady performance, and for that reason I'm going to give him a 6 overall. Now in terms of things he made or saves he made in the game, there isn't actually that many to talk about, in the fact that Tottenham Hotspur only had 2 shots on target. So, well, yeah, I think it was 2 shots on target. They had a few more shots, but only 2 on target. So in that respect, you can understand why we were able to hold on to them and actually have such a solid defensive performance. Is mainly because Tottenham weren't really, up to their full gears, and when you consider they were essentially playing their second string 11, because of the Champions League match, you can understand, Tottenham not necessarily being at their best. And certainly Hennessy was one of the players to sort of benefit from that, basically because he didn't really have much to do in the game, mainly because Tottenham weren't really peppering our goal. And like I said already, I do think our defensive performance was good, and maybe that's one of the reasons why Tottenham didn't really have that many shots. But I do still think Hennessy, when called upon, he was still able to make good saves. Now in the first half there was one particular chance, Harry Kane, I think it was on the edge of the areas, obviously had a go, and obviously Hennessy was able to get down low and push it away. And then there was one in the second half as well, a few times where he's managed to make himself big, get the ball off the opposition, and certainly towards the end of the game where our back four was tiring a bit, when Tottenham were getting in behind, Hennessy was always first in there to obviously claim the ball off the attacker. So in that respect, I think Hennessy, when called upon, was able to make saves. But I just think overall, the fact that he looked very comfortable in the goal was mainly because Tottenham didn't really test him that much. And when the opposition has 2 shots on goal and you still make a number more saves than that, it obviously just goes to show that actually you're just doing your job, in the fact that whatever's coming at you, you're dealing with it, but also goes to show that maybe Tottenham weren't necessarily playing at 100%. And ultimately, like I said already, even though Tottenham weren't playing that great, I still think we were playing very good as well. So I think you can't give any discredit, let's say, to either side. Now, overall, I do think he looked comfortable in the goal, and that's why I've given him the 6. But really, I think, you know, once again, another consistent, pretty average performance from him. And the reason I can't really give him a 7 is, like I said, because he didn't really have too much to do overall. Now, in terms of the goal we conceded, obviously Hennessy, he was centred when the ball first came into the box. Obviously, that's been headed away, so obviously he's gone down to ground thinking it was going to come towards him. Obviously, he couldn't quite get up quick enough to get to the other one, but like I'll talk about later on, that was Jordan Ayew who was at fault for that, in the fact that he didn't jump, he just stood there and let the defender, you know, head it in. So actually, in that respect, I don't really think there's any blame on Hennessy for the goal. And like I've said already, it was a very steady performance from Hennessy. And if you put the goal aside, I do think he obviously deserved to get a bit more from the game. If we went on to draw the game, I certainly do think Hennessy, you'll be giving him a bit of credit, because at these certain moments, i.e. when he made that save from Harry Kane, obviously they're sort of moments that kept us in the game. And you know, I'll go on to talk about this in quite a lot of detail later on, but I still do think, even though we lost the game and we were pretty sort of not that great, let's say, I don't want to say we were terrible, but we weren't that great in the final third. On the other side, and sort of the complete opposite, is that actually at the back defensively, and obviously the midfielders playing in front of the defence, were very solid from the game. So you've got to look at the game and go, yes, it was another disappointing result, but actually if you compare it to the Chelsea game where the performance was good up until 60 minutes, you look at the Arsenal game where the performance was good, this, out of them 3 games, certainly the Tottenham game was the best in terms of performance. But once again, Wayne Hennessy here, a 6 for him, not really at blame for the goal, and once again, like he's done in recent weeks, another steady performance. So I'm now going to move on to the first player in our defence, and that is of course the right back, Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Now obviously this guy, and I say this week in week out, much like what I said with Hennessy in the fact that he's fairly consistent, Wan-Bissaka is obviously fairly consistent but always at a high level, and this guy really does never fail to impress me. And once again here against Spurs, which incidentally was the club that he made his debut against last season, he once again put in a steady performance, and for that reason I'm going to give him an 8 overall. But like I've said, you know, he was playing against the side that he made his debut against last season, so maybe you could expect him, you know, because it being quite a big occasion in the fact that he's playing against that club he first played against in the Premier League, you can maybe understand if his head went a bit and he weren't necessarily, you know, playing that good, because he was obviously letting that sort of event get to him. But the fact that he didn't do that and he impressed once again just goes to show, you know, the quality that this guy's got, but also the potential as well, because if you're performing and impressing us at the moment in games like this, you're only going to get better, and certainly that was sort of the theme here. Now obviously his defensive work was great, and that's the main thing which I'm really impressed with, and that's the reason I've given him the 8. But actually something about his game was actually his attacking play, and that was something that I've been asking for him for quite a lot this season, you know, to improve that. And certainly in this game here against Tottenham, even though we weren't that great going forward, and that ultimately that's why we lost the game, because of our lack of quality in that final third, even though that was the case, I do actually think he provided quite a nice attack down the right hand side. And it wasn't just because he was, you know, getting down that side and, you know, passing the ball to people like Townsend or even someone like Ayew as well, but the fact that he was making these marauding runs down the right hand side, so the fact that he was carrying the ball forward, dribbling past defenders, whilst also, you know, he's got 2 players marking him, the fact that he's able to get past them and put a ball into the box, albeit not all the crosses get to the intended target, but the fact that he's able to make these marauding, very strong runs forward down that right hand side, whilst also, you know, trying to sort of jink past the opposition defenders, that was of course great to see as well. Now of course this was all great going forward, but the main part of his game, considering how good Tottenham have been this season in terms of their attacking play, was just to keep, you know, Tottenham quiet. And actually I do think Wan-Bissaka, although the defence as a whole, the back 4 done a relatively good job, I do think Wan-Bissaka in particular done a very good job in terms of just keeping Tottenham's attacking threats in check. So making sure people like Dele Alli couldn't get past, making sure that Lamela, who was playing out wide, making sure he couldn't get into the box. So things like that, Wan-Bissaka was obviously tasked with it, and I do think he made sure they were in check, and basically he made sure that all of Tottenham's best attacking threats weren't really able to punish us overall. Now of course, you know, like he always does, he makes lots of challenge throughout the game, and this game was no different, you know, making a number of, you know, timely challenges to obviously stop Spurs on the break. And I think it was just overall just really epitomises him in the fact that all of his displays are just superb. I couldn't really fault him for anything in this game. Maybe you could say a few times where he did miss a few tackles and he obviously had to go in again to receive the ball back. But other than that, and other than the fact that he missed a few challenges, like I've said, I actually think he was absolutely superb and does obviously deserve the 8 I've given him. But like I've said, I can't really sort of highlight it enough. This guy, 20 years old, has got a big future ahead of him, but the fact that he's playing as well as this against top oppositions and so consistently as well really just goes to show the talent this guy's got. And as the saying goes, the sky is the limit, because this guy is, he's been fantastic this season as a whole, but this game in particular against quality opposition who, like I've said already, have had a pretty good start to the season. The fact that he was able to deal with them so well was really quite impressive. Now, I suppose the final point really for me to talk about is that although I thought the defence as a whole was really good, and like I've said already, I don't really think the defence really was at fault for the goals we conceded, because obviously, like I'll go on to mention it, but I think IU was at fault for that. So in that respect, I thought our defensive performance was really good. But the one thing I would say about Wan-Bissaka is he's quite often he's done this season, but this game in particular, he was just showing up the more experienced teammates. Now, when you consider Wan-Bissaka, who's only played sort of, I think it's 17 or so Premier League games, the fact that he's got less than probably less than maybe like a tenth of the experience that people or other players in the team have got. The fact that he's got that and still he's performing or outperforming them, I suppose, performing to an even higher level. The fact that he's doing that, and the fact that he's actually showing up some of his teammates, and the fact that he's playing much better than them, once again goes to show how good he is, but also just goes to show that maybe, obviously young players have to learn from the players around them, but maybe people in the defence especially can just look at Wan-Bissaka and maybe learn something from there. Obviously I'm sort of waffling a bit here, but I still do think, the fact that he's sort of showing up the experienced players by looking like the most experienced player on the pitch, the fact that he always knows where he has to be positionally, the fact that he always knows when is the correct moment to make a challenge, things like this really just goes to show that even though he's got inexperience, he's actually playing as if he's, one of the most experienced players on the pitch, which really just goes to show his maturity, but also just the quality he's got overall. But Wan-Bissaka here, an 8 for him. I don't know how many 8s I've given him this season, but I've got to say it's quite a lot given how good his performances have been. But like I've said, playing on that right hand side up against the threats like Dele Alli and Lamela, I think he's done a very good job in terms of keeping them threats in check and making sure that they obviously couldn't cause us any problems. And like I've said, yes, he was good defensively, but he also combined that with that attacking threat, running up and down that right hand side, which of course was a lot more effective than it has been in recent weeks. And the final point really for me is that, much like what I mentioned with Hennessy, the fact that he was fairly quiet in the game, one of the reasons for that is because the defence, in particular Wan-Bissaka, done so well at dealing with the attacking threat of Spurs, which basically meant that people like Hennessy didn't really have too much to do in the game, because the defence obviously in front of him were obviously doing such a great job, and obviously Wan-Bissaka done his part there. So I'm now going to move on to the first of our centre-backs, and that is of course James Tompkins, who I am going to give a 7 overall. Now of course I go on to talk about him going off injured and how I personally thought that changed the game a bit, but before that I just want to talk about his performance overall, because I do sort of, maybe you could argue that I overuse this word quite a lot, but I do think he was solid at the back, and I think that really just does sort of epitomise James Tompkins, and certainly Saka as well, in the fact that obviously, like I've said, playing against top quality opposition, especially people like Harry Kane and Dele Alli, obviously you need Tompkins and Sacco, and of course Vanano and Wan-Bissaka as well to be on the top of their game. But the centre backs in particular, they've got to be strong, and certainly that's what we saw with James Tompkins. Who was very solid at the back, made sure, or I think not very much got past him, let's put it that way, and he made sure they made it as difficult as possible for the Spurs attackers to actually get a chance inside the box. And I do think certainly in that first half, obviously it ended 0-0, I certainly do think you've got to give a lot of credit to the two centre backs. Sacco, obviously I'll go on to talk about him, but he was making tackles all over the place, and Tompkins was just being that physical presence and basically just making sure that nothing didn't get into the box, and even when it did get into the box, he was making sure that he was making it as hard as possible for the opposition. Now of course his defensive work was good, and I do think the word solid is the best to describe it, but I do actually think in terms of an attacking threat, I do think Tompkins was fairly efficient there as well. Now he had a couple of opportunities from set pieces at the other end of the pitch, and although they didn't come to anything, I think the fact that he found himself in these positions, and the fact that he was able to sort of, especially from corners, the fact that he was able to draw himself away from the defender into space and into a position where, albeit at a tight angle, he could put the ball across the face of goal for someone else to obviously tap in. Whatever it was, even though nothing really came from it, the fact that he's actually getting on the end of these crosses, and actually he's been quite clever in the fact that he's running away from defenders into space and finding areas like that. That was obviously quite impressive, and the fact that he combined his very good solid defensive work and combined that with that attacking threat from set pieces, especially the corners, I must mention, that was of course great to see as well. Now, of course, one chance in particular, he was obviously quite guilty of missing it. I think it was just sort of early into the second half. Obviously, the ball came into the area, he's at the far post, he's obviously tried to head it down, and it's gone into the side netting. So you could argue that was obviously a good chance there for him just to put it in at the far post. But if you look back at the angle, it's quite difficult, and because there's a player right next to him coming into him, it's obviously quite a difficult header to make. But then some could argue, which I personally do think is sort of 50-50, but maybe rather than trying to head it into the top corner, which you could argue that's what you expect to do, just put it across the face of goal, because by doing that, because you've got loads of players in the box, it's going to cause the scramble, and maybe someone will be able to get their toe on it and just put it in. But obviously, we weren't able to get anything from that corner. But like I've said, you don't really expect centre-backs to be scoring every game. But the fact that he's getting it on the end of these chances, eventually one of them's got to come to something, because the last few games or so he's had loads of opportunities from set pieces, so eventually one of them is going to come to something. And obviously, as we've seen in previous seasons, he does actually have a threat, so we knew that already. But obviously it'd be nice for him to score a few more goals like he's obviously done in seasons gone by. Now obviously, just after the hour mark, he was obviously substituted after picking up a knock. Obviously at the time we were thinking this is quite bad, because obviously James Tompkins played really, really well up until that point, and certainly him and Saka were the main reasons we were in the game at 0-0. But much like what was the theme last season against Spurs, as soon as James Tompkins went off, a few moments later we concede. And obviously it's not mainly because, or not purely down to the fact that Tompkins went off, but I certainly do think that if he was on the pitch, we might not have conceded that goal, mainly because of the organisation inside of the box. Obviously people like Ayew would have been instructed what to do, but because he was taken off, maybe that sort of misconfusion in the box, or maybe it's just the fact that Ayew was just terrible inside the box and obviously didn't head it when he should have. Whatever it was, obviously maybe Tompkins could have made a difference in that scenario. But I do think, listening to Roy Hodgson after the game, he basically said he sort of felt something in his knee. He was walking a bit gingerly. Probably isn't something too serious, maybe a bit of bruising here and there, but obviously as a precaution, rather than risk it, just take him off. And I certainly think that actually Martin Kelly come on, he also put in a fairly competent performance. So actually in the end you could argue that actually the defence, even though it was solid and we obviously had changes to it, it didn't seem to affect the performance. So in that respect you can go, actually Tompkins going off didn't really make a difference, because it was a mistake by Ayew which led to the goal. But I still do think if Tompkins had been on the pitch, maybe it would have been a different story. But overall I do think a 7 I've given him is a fair result. Like I've said already, I do think he was rock solid at the back, and the fact that he was getting on the end of chances from set pieces as well was of course a bonus. And like I've said, eventually he's getting chances every game. Eventually one of these is going to come to something, and hopefully he'll score from it. And even if he isn't going to score from it, if he's going to continue to be clever and sort of run in behind and get away from the defender, rather than trying to head to goal every time, just try and put it back into the box, or put it across the goal line, just so it causes a scramble in the box, because maybe we might have a better chance that comes from that. But overall, James Tompkins, I do think a 7 is a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to his centre-back partner, Mamadou Sakho, and I'm also going to give him a 7 overall, because I do think in terms of just being rock solid at the back, and in terms of just comparing performances, I do think they were both very good. Now, I could say much the same and repeat quite a lot what I said with Tompkins, in the fact that Sakho was very solid at the back, made it difficult for the likes of Lamela, Harry Kane and Dele Alli to obviously get chances for on goal, but also just the sheer amount of, tackles and blocks that Sakho made, especially in the first half. There was a ball into the box, it looked like it was going to go in from Dele Alli, I think it was, but Sakho put his body on the line and obviously it deflected, and obviously we were able to clear. So not only was Sakho making these tackles, but also he was making these fantastic blocks, just basically putting his body in the line of everything. And that sort of I suppose resolute defending, that sort of putting your body on the line sort of approach to the game, was one of the key reasons why we were playing so good in the game, in the fact that whenever Spurs got into the box, they couldn't get anything from it, mainly because people like Saka were putting their body on the line and obviously making it as difficult as possible for them. Now, in terms of his performance as a whole, like he always does, he has these sort of heart in mouth moments. Obviously there was one where he made a pass to Milivojevic. Milivojevic was obviously tried to control the pass, and obviously Harry Kane was able to dispossess it, and he had a shot, and obviously Hennessy saved. So in terms of that, that was obviously a bit sort of heart in mouth moment, in the fact that Sakho, you know, should really be playing maybe a better pass there, but then Luka should obviously not be giving the ball away with his lack of control. But obviously, like I said, you know, yes, Sakho has a few of these sort of maverick moments, let's call them, but actually he makes up for that with just his overall defensive performance. You know, the fact that he dealt with the threat of Harry Kane, the fact that Harry Kane, who scored 4 and 4 before this game, the fact that he didn't score in the game was obviously great to see, but also the fact that Sakho dealt with him so well, and the fact that he combined just his solid defensive performance with moments where he, you know, he popped up with these fantastic blocks and last ditch tackles, and you know things like that as well. That was obviously the thing that was really impressive for me. But I don't really think there's any more for me to add, because I just think he done the job of what he was meant to do, making blocks, making tackles, and that's what you would expect from him. And certainly over the last sort of few weeks or so, people have been becoming a bit worried and thinking Sakho is not necessarily as good as he has been in previous seasons, and he sort of lost his consistency. But this game here against Tottenham at the weekend, I think it was him sort of back to his norm, you know, and back to what we expect from him. So hopefully in the next few weeks or so, you know, we've got the international break coming up, and I think he's in the French squad again. So maybe that sort of confidence of the fact that he's being rewarded for his good performances with a call up to the national team, hopefully that can just, you know, push his performances on even further. And hopefully Tompkins' injury isn't too serious either, because I do think as a partnership at the back, you know, I talked about this quite a lot last season, but they are a formidable you know, force at the back. So hopefully if they can carry on their form whilst also Tompkins, you know, his injury not being too serious, then of course that would be great going forward. So now I'm going to move on to the final player in our defence, and that is of course the left back Patrick Van Aanholt. Now, like what I said with the whole defence and the fact that it was a fairly solid game from the whole of the back four, I do think Van Aanholt had a fairly decent game, but he certainly weren't up to the standards, and he certainly weren't as effective, let's say, as Wan-Bissaka was on the other side, and for that reason I'm going to give him a 6 overall. Now, of course, the main thing about Van Aanholt's play is the fact that he always likes to get down the left-hand side, and we didn't quite see that in the game here against Tottenham. Now, whether that's the fact that because Tottenham are a better team, you have to sit more deep and absorb the pressure, or whether it's just the fact that he weren't necessarily able to go forward or didn't necessarily want to go forward, whatever it was, we didn't necessarily see him going as forward, or you know, as much as we would have liked. Now, although he didn't do it that often, when he did do it, it did obviously prove quite effective. You know, a few 1-2s with people like RU, people, you know, I suppose like Meyer as well, who was playing down that side as well. People like that, when he was linking up with them, was obviously very effective, but he didn't do it enough in the game. And certainly, I think he would look back at the game himself and go, actually, I didn't get forward as much as I would have liked. And certainly, the fans looking at the game, you know, when we consider how good he is going forward, we obviously didn't quite see him going going forward as much as we obviously would have liked as well. And you know, when you consider how effective Wan-Bissaka was in this game, in the fact that he was doing his fantastic defensive work, which is Van Aanholt, I think, was doing his perfectly fine defensive work, but actually just going forward down that left hand side, that was the only real thing that was lacking from his performance. And certainly, if we saw a bit more attacking intent from his performance, as well as obviously how good he and how solid he was defensively, maybe we probably would have seen him coming out of the game with a 7 overall. Now, in terms of the goal we conceded, obviously I'll go on and talk about RU, because I think RU is, you know, at least 99% at fault for that goal, and the fact that he obviously didn't jump to clear it. But in terms of Van Aanholt, you know, Van Aanholt was on that near post. Rather than just standing there, he should have at least tried to jump, and obviously at least try and make it difficult for the ball to go in. And even if it's going to literally smash you right in the face, I'd rather, you know, I'm sure you as a defender would rather have a ball slap you in the face than the goal go in. But like I've said already, I do think RU was at fault for that, and because RU obviously didn't jump, just stood there and let Foyth, you know, head the ball down, it obviously put pressure on Van Aanholt, who was already on that far post, on that near post. But obviously, because he's under the post, there's only so much he can do, and ultimately for us the ball to go in. So for that, maybe you could argue maybe 1-2% of the fault is actually on Van Aanholt there, because he maybe should have been marking his near post better, but actually the fault's got to go on RU, who obviously didn't jump. But you could argue, like I've said, I've seen a few people say it, that maybe Van Aanholt should have done better. But then I also see the argument that actually, if Van Aanholt hadn't have been on that near post, if he hadn't been on that near post and he would have been somewhere else in the box, people would still be moaning in the fact that he wasn't in the right place positionally. So the fact that he got one part of it right in his positioning, and the fact that he was given a difficult situation from one of his teammates being selfish and not jumping to obviously do his defensive work. That was, of course, overall was obviously disappointing. But like I said already, I'm going to give Van Aanholt a 6 overall, because I do think defensively he was alright, and actually, even though he wasn't necessarily going forward as much as he would have liked, when he did go forward on them few occasions, it was fairly effective. So overall, to improve his performance, probably would have liked to see a bigger attacking threat from him. But overall, I do think the back four as a whole do deserve credit, and I certainly think that Van Aanholt does obviously deserve credit for how solid the back four was defensively. So I'm going to move on now to the midfield, and I'm going to start with the captain Luka Milivojevic, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, in terms of his performance, like what I said with quite a few players, I do think him and Chiarte in particular were very important, especially in the sort of first half going into the first bit of the second half, in terms of restricting Spurs. And basically, because our back four was so solid, that was also due to the fact that the two players in front of them in the midfield, because they were doing such good work, it obviously meant that the back four were protected, and because the back four were playing so well, it meant that Hennessy was protected. So the fact that we've got a main core of players playing well and restricting Spurs and making it difficult for them was one of the reasons we played so well and were so good defensively, is the fact that the back four played well, but also that the two players in front of them did as well. And I certainly do think Luka, when you consider he hasn't necessarily had the best start to the season, the last few games or so he's started to get back to his old self, and this game here, certainly I think you could argue that this was one of his best games this season, just in the fact that he was back to his normal self, not only I suppose as the captain, but just in terms of his performance in midfield. Now, in terms of on the half an hour mark, he was obviously guilty of a very bad mistake. Obviously, I talked about already the fact that Harry Kane, from that loose Mamadou Sakho pass, passed it to Luka. Luka's miscontrolled it, and Harry Kane's obviously got the ball, gone through on goal. Luckily for us, Hennessy made the save, which is just a standard save, nothing really spectacular there. But obviously that was sort of a unnecessary pressure we were putting the goalkeeper on, in the fact that the goalkeeper was given a short pass to a midfielder, and of course the fact that Luka couldn't quite control the ball there. But luckily for us, obviously yes, that was a bad mistake in the fact that he should be able to control the ball on the edge of the area. But like I've said, obviously Hennessy was there to save us, but ultimately that's what you want goalkeepers there to do, just to provide you. Obviously, if you do make a mistake, obviously they're there to cover you up. Now, obviously, fortunately for him, like I've said already, obviously Hennessy was equal to it and obviously blocked the effort from just outside the box. So it wasn't like Harry Kane had run 20 yards from getting the ball off Luka. He only ran a few yards, then had a shot. But like I've said, Hennessy was equal to it. So in that respect, you could say he was obviously guilty of that bad mistake. But the fact that Harry Kane, by the time he took the shot, he wasn't actually too far away from when Luka gave the ball away, I suppose you could say that's a better thing, because it shows that it wasn't necessarily, we didn't necessarily give Harry Kane so much space to run onto, but also the fact that it wasn't too far from Luka just shows that actually if he got up a bit quicker, maybe he could have obviously stopped Harry Kane from getting that. But in terms of his set pieces, I do think, even though they weren't the greatest, I do think his set pieces were relatively good throughout the game. Some obviously were quite poor at times, but then there were others, i.e. the one that Tompkins got his head on, that was obviously one of the ones that was quite decent. And although, people like Lloris were flapping quite a lot in the game, yes, obviously that's maybe down to his own confidence, but I do actually think that maybe the fact that we were putting in dangerous deliveries and the fact that we were putting our tallest most physical players in the box, maybe that alongside the deliveries from Luka was obviously causing Lloris, to make these unnecessary sort of flaps at the ball. And certainly from one or two of them, we obviously probably should have scored from them, because when you consider, your goalkeeper just flapped at the ball's loose in the box, you need to just get someone there, just get a foot on it and just try and, rifle it into the net. But overall, I do think, the fact that Luka made a number of tackles in the midfield, not only, just in the fact of protecting the back four, but just all across the midfield, wherever he was playing, in terms of whether it was his defensive work or whether it's just the fact of winning the ball back in the midfield and driving forward, whatever it was, I thought he was very good at that. And in terms of something I talk about quite a lot with Chiarte in particular, it's just that tenacity, the fact that he was playing all over the place, giving his all effort. And when you consider he hasn't necessarily been the greatest this season, to have a performance like this where he led the line, he obviously done his defensive work and, was really one of the key players in the fact that we played so well and were so solid at the back. Of course, for me, that's why you're going to give him credit. But overall, Luka Milivojevic here, I do think a 6 is a fair result. Yes, he obviously made a mistake where he obviously gifted Harry Kane a goal. Gifted Harry Kane a route for on goal. Luckily for us, Hennessy did make a save. But if you put that aside, I do think, the number of tackles he made in midfield and the fact that he had that presence in midfield, I do think that more than makes up for it. So overall, Luka Milivojevic here, I think a 6 is a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to his midfield partner, Cheku Kouyaté, who I think certainly, if you ask any Palace fan, over the last sort of maybe 3 or 4 games, he's certainly been up there with one of our best players. And once again, in this game here against Tottenham, you know, quality opposition, especially in the midfield areas, and the fact that he once again dealt with them very well was obviously quite impressive to see. And for that reason, I'm going to give him a 7 overall. Now, like I've already mentioned, you know, he was playing alongside Milivojevic in the midfield, and that sort of 4 at the back with 2 defensive midfielders in front of it, that basically just gave us a solid base to build on for the rest of the game. And the fact that he was combative was not only because obviously him himself being a physical presence, but I just think him partnered with Milivojevic is a really good combination, you know, gives a nice balance to the team. But also the fact that they both combine their physicality, work rate, tackling ability, combine that all, I do think, you know, playing alongside each other, they are very good in the middle of the park. And like I've said, Kouyaté in particular was very combative in the fact that he was always looking to put him, you know, win the battles in the midfield, always looking to drive forward and obviously getting back and using his physical presence to push players off the ball and make tackles as well. Everything in terms of the defensive play was quite good. And like I said with Luka, you know, obviously the back 4 played superbly, and that's obviously why I'm giving them praise, but actually I think some of that praise needs to be given to the you know, the 2 players in front of them, because I do think that extra protection that they gave the back 4 was certainly quite crucial, you know, to how solid and compact we played defensively. And when you consider, you know, essentially you could argue at times the fact that they work so well together is essentially a back 6, and if you include the keeper it's a back 7, but let's say a back 6, the fact that you've got all of these 6 players, you know, concentrating on the defending and just making sure that Tottenham get past. If you get that combination right, like we did, it obviously means you restrict the opposition really well, and that's certainly what we did do really well. But the main reason I've given him a 7 is not the fact that he played so well in that defensive role, it's just the fact that he tried to get Palace forward as much as possible, and the fact that when we were going forward, he not only was looking to start it off, but he was looking to support them. So by making runs on the outside, even though he's not, you know, a wide man, the fact that he can, you know, make these runs and carry the ball forward is obviously great to see. And the fact that he made quite a number of surges from deep. So it's not only the fact that he just gets the ball from deep, passes it out and starts the attacks like that. He actually picks up the ball from deep, drives forward, uses his physicality to drive through that midfield. And the fact that he'd done that quite a number of times from deep and went into, you know, some quite advanced positions, that was of course great to see as well. But like I've said already, you know, I'm going to give him a 7 because of just that immense work rate he has. The fact that he works tirelessly with both his defensive and offensive work, and the fact that he obviously drove us forward so nicely in the game was obviously quite impressive to see. And you know, like I've said already, even though he isn't an attacking player, when you've got someone like that who may not be the most technical player, but if you've got someone who can drive the ball and just give their all and have that sort of presence for the team, that was of course great to see. And I suppose my final point really, and I've seen a few people picking this out, is the fact that he's just settling in nicely. So obviously he's been with us since the summer, but the fact that he's now playing week in, week out in the team, and the fact that he's now starting to sort of stake a claim on that position, and the fact that he's obviously, you know, he fits quite well to the system we're playing, albeit it's not that great for our attacking work, but actually defensively the system we play seems to do really well, and certainly Kouyaté seems to be a player who really fits in nicely to that role. But overall, Cheku Kouyaté, I do think a 7 is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to the third player in the midfield, and that is of course the German Max Meyer, who I'm going to give a 6 overall for his performance. Now in terms of his performance, you know, it's one that's come up for quite a lot of debate. You know, some people, not including myself, have thought he was absolutely terrible and he hasn't necessarily lived up to the expectations that people thought about him. Whereas the way I look at it, I go, the fact that he's playing out of position really limits what he can do in the game. And I certainly do think that actually when he was playing more central throughout the game, he did look slightly more effective. So it just goes to show that actually, yes, people have differing opinions, but I personally do think the fact that he is playing not as good, let's say, as his potential is mainly the fact that he's been playing out of position. But moving aside from, you know, where he was playing, I do think it was a slightly disappointing performance from him, considering, you know, what we've seen in recent weeks, and the fact that his offensive play, his sort of creativity is really one of the main reasons, you know, in recent weeks why, even though we haven't been winning games, but why we've been playing well is mainly because of his creativity, especially his link up with Wilfried Zaha. But obviously in this game here, he was playing on that left hand side, and I personally think that really did limit him throughout the game, and that's one of the reasons he played not necessarily that great. I personally think it's because he was playing out of position. Now, in terms of things he'd done throughout the game, I do think quite a number of times he gave the ball away quite cheaply, and that was slightly early on in the game. So, although we were playing very well, we were matching Tottenham, let's say, for the majority of the first half. But I do think he gave away possession quite cheaply on a number of occasions. But much like what was the theme of Tottenham, I suppose, is the fact that they're playing their second string side and they really just failed to make it count, and obviously failed to make Palace play. But it just once again goes back to the fact that even though Max Meyer was playing in midfield, because he was playing slightly further wide, it basically meant that that back six, which I've already mentioned, because they were defending so solid and so deep and so well, it obviously meant that when someone like Max Meyer, gave away the ball quite cheaply, it didn't really cost us. Now, of course, he was quite anonymous in the game, and I do think that's why many people are, putting him up for criticism. But like I've said, the fact that he still showed some nice touches, and the fact that he still tried to, create something from the game, especially linking up with people like Fernando, the fact that he was still trying to make things happen despite playing out of position on the left hand side was obviously quite good. But obviously the fact that he failed to impress, failed to sort of take the game by the scruff of the neck and be that sort of main focal point of our attack, the fact that he's got that creativity which we've seen from him this season, but we didn't quite see it in this game here, that was of course quite disappointing. And of course, just after Spurs had taken the lead, he got substituted. Wasn't really the fact that he was playing badly or playing, because I do think maybe there was a few other players that maybe in the heat of the moment maybe you should take people off. People like MacArthur, who I thought wasn't terrible but just was ineffective, so maybe someone like he could have come off. But I do think the reason that Roy Hodgson took Meyer off is because he brought on Jeffrey Schlupp. So rather than playing Meyer out wide in his unnatural position, which he easily could have done from the start, he easily could have played Meyer in his correct position and not had to take him off because he was ineffective. But because he played him out there and because he was ineffective, obviously brought Jeffrey Schlupp on. And of course, because Jeffrey Schlupp more suited to play on that left hand side and obviously more suited to play a much wider role, it obviously meant that he actually had more of an impact than Meyer had on the game, albeit they weren't necessarily both great. But like I've said already, I do think he was neat and tidy, and I do think, that really warrants the 6. The fact that he was neat and tidy on the ball, had nice touches on the ball. But because of Roy Hodgson playing him wide, it really did restrict him. And I do think that it's fair in some respects for people to say he's not as good as we thought he would be. I don't necessarily think we've seen enough of him to make that sort of judgment yet, but I do think that he's not necessarily playing to his best of his ability because he's been playing out of position. You've only got to look at the Bournemouth game, for example, and even some spells of some of the games recently that actually he plays really well when moved down the middle. And I think the Everton game is another example where when he was playing down the middle, linking up with people like Andros Townsend, people like Wilf, he was actually most effective. So rather than Roy Hodgson taking him off because he's ineffective, and rather than him playing him out of position, why not just change the system up a bit, maybe go to a 4-3-3 formation, or maybe even a 4-2-3-1 formation, and play Meyer in that number 10 role, because it will get the best out of him. Because at the moment he's being neglected out wide, and he's basically being restricted, whereas if you give him that creativity, you give him that responsibility to play down the middle in that number 10 role, I do think he can do great wonders for us. But once again, Meyer, I suppose a Marmite performance from him. Some people thought he was not that good and pretty ineffective, whereas people like myself actually think that yes, he wasn't that great, but he still had a few good touches on the ball here and there, quite neat and tidy. So in that respect, I do think the 6 I've given him is fair, a fair reflection overall. So I'm going to move on now to the final player in our midfield, and that is of course James MacArthur. And as I've already mentioned I think alongside Meyer, even though they both weren't great in the game, I don't necessarily think they were both terrible. And for that reason, much like what I gave Meyer, I'm going to give James MacArthur a 6. Now, in terms of his performances recently, I've been calling for him to be dropped because he hasn't necessarily been playing to that standard he was playing at last season, and certainly he's been a bit more ineffective this season than he has been in previous ones. But this game here, he seemed to be getting back to his usual self in the fact that he was getting about on the pitch, playing on that right hand side, he was getting up and down that flank, and certainly, when we had to defend and when we had to sort of absorb that Spurs pressure, I do think he done very well to obviously come back and do his defensive work. Now, obviously, he's still not performing that great, and he's still not, playing to his best of his ability. But the fact that he's getting back to his usual self, and the fact that he was playing at a slightly better standard than he has been doing recently, was of course, great. Now, in terms of getting around the pitch, one of the things I liked is the fact that he was just making life difficult for, the Spurs midfielders in particular, and obviously the attackers you can add on to that. And that's basically because he was moving up and down the pitch, you know, putting himself about in midfield, because he was just making his presence known, he was obviously making it difficult for the opposition, and that's something he hasn't done in recent weeks. And whether it's the same sort of story with Maya, in the fact that when he's played out wide it sort of neglects his skill and basically makes him sort of ineffective in the game. Whether that's the case, I'm not sure, but even though he was playing out wide here, he still seemed to improve on recent games, and hopefully if Roy Hodgson does persist with this formation, which doesn't really seem to be working, it seems to work defensively and in certain aspects of the midfield, but in other aspects of the midfield and going forward it doesn't seem to work, so maybe there's something there that needs to be changed. But like I've said, I do think MacArthur, you know, making life difficult for the opponents was of course great to see, but I don't think he had necessarily too much impact going forward. So, and obviously as a result of that he got substituted. So much like what I said with Maya, in the fact that yes, he's very good playing down the middle, you know, driving forward, but when you play him out wide he's slightly more ineffective. And I personally do think, you know, MacArthur, as we've seen in previous seasons, you know, if you play him in a number 10 or playing off the striker, he can be a very, you know, potent finisher for us. But because he's playing out wide, yes, he can do a shift there and he can give you, you know, 6 out of 10 every week, but he's not really that effective. But it was nice to see a slightly better game from him when you compare it to previous games. Now, in terms of, I suppose one of the main negatives from his game is that because he was playing wide, you'd expect him to go back and help us defend. And although he did do that, I think the one part of his defensive work that he didn't quite do that well is just protecting Aaron Wan-Bissaka from Davis's overlap. So we know that Davis, well, both Tottenham fullbacks for that, they always like to overlap, always like to, you know, get in behind, put crosses in, and certainly that was the case here, and Davis in particular was doing it quite well. But obviously Aaron Wan-Bissaka dealt with it relatively well, but it would have been nicer, you know, for MacArthur just to give him a bit more protection there and just a bit more support, because although MacArthur had done his bit in the midfield, his defensive work, you know, by making it difficult for the oppositions, when it came to, you know, tracking back, which he normally is good at, he didn't quite do that, and obviously, you know, didn't really protect Aaron Wan-Bissaka as much as he would have liked. But I do think MacArthur, I do think that 6 I've given him is a fair result. You know, when you consider he hasn't been that great this season, but this was a game in the right direction, you know, another steady performance from him. And although he didn't necessarily, although he, you know, got himself about a bit, you know, he didn't necessarily have as much impact going forward as he would have liked. But the main reason for me that I liked about, or the main thing I liked about his performance is the fact that he made life difficult for the opponents was quite key. And when you consider the amount of defensive work we had to do to put in the good performance we did, obviously you've got to look at someone like MacArthur and go, actually, even though you weren't necessarily directly involved with the defence and the defensive work, I still do think the fact that he made it difficult for the opponents in midfield, that was of course quite key to our overall defensive play. So I'm going to move on now to the first of our 2 strikers, and that is of course Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give a 6 overall for his performance. Now, like what I said with MacArthur and the fact that I mentioned the formation and, you know, it not necessarily working, you know, 4-4-2. Yes, obviously we were at, you know, we don't have Zaha available. We didn't have Christian Benteke, so we're without these players. So of course you know, you can't expect too much going forward in the fact that we haven't got our best quality players in that position there. But of course we had to make do, you know, Townsend playing up top with Ayew, and I do think that at times it seemed to work in the fact that they've both got that skill and that pace and that ability to go forward. But it did show quite clearly for me in this game that yes, they can do a job there once in a while, but people like Andros Townsend, for example, he sort of is neglected down the middle because when he plays his best is when he's out wide, putting crosses into the box. And certainly towards the end of the game, where he was drifted out wide, we did seem to, you know, see him improve in this game. And I personally think that's just because of the change of formation. So, like I've already mentioned, in the fact that MacArthur and Maya don't necessarily fit into this formation, the same could be said for someone like Andros Townsend, in the fact that if we changed to a 4-3-3, maybe push someone like Maya further forward, or even if we'd, you know, dropped maybe MacArthur and actually played Maya in the midfield 3 and then played maybe even Jeffrey Slop and Andros Townsend out wide with Ayew up top, maybe that sort of change of formation could have sort of seen the upturn in the performances of not only, you know, Townsend, but in terms of Ayew and in terms of maybe someone like Maya as well. If we had just changed up the formation to suit the players better, then maybe we would have seen, you know, a sort of a different outcome from the game. But I still do think that certain aspects of the 4-4-2 work, but then other aspects don't. So when you consider how good we were defensively, that's mainly because of the formation staying compact, but actually going forward, because we weren't getting crosses into the box, and because we didn't necessarily we were playing with wide midfielders as opposed to wingers, that sort of restricts us in that formation. So players can suffer, but then also other players benefit from it. So we need to get that mix right, and I personally do think going forward, maybe the 4-3-3 or the 4-2-3-1 formation, you know, could be something that we need going forward. Now, of course, Andros Townsend, you know, I talked about quite a lot this season in the fact that when players go back to their old clubs, you know, they get booed, or, you know, sort of just the moment gets to them. And of course, Andros Townsend, you know, he's now played, I think he's now played as many games in his 3 years at Palace than he did doing his whole career at Tottenham, or there's some sort of stat like that, or he's now spent, you know, yeah, I think he's made more appearances or something like that than his time at Tottenham. So of course you can say that, yes, he didn't have the best of times at Tottenham, but obviously coming back to face his old club, the fact that he was still, you know, industrious, he was chasing down balls, harrying the defenders, the fact that he didn't let that moment get to him, and the fact that he was still able to do that sort of offensive work was of course great to see. But like I've already mentioned, you know, the formation works in some aspects, and in Townsend's case, the fact that he's got that ability to chase defenders and just harry them, that's obviously great to see. But the fact that we're not getting balls into the box that easily, and we're not getting that many balls into the box, you know, we're creating chances in midfield, but we're not getting them into the box, obviously just went to show obviously the lack of chances. And even when we did get chances, Townsend in particular, you know, couldn't quite produce that telling moment to make the difference. So although he was making a difference in the fact that he was putting pressure on the opposition and obviously chasing them, harrying them, and basically, especially in that first half where it was raining so heavily, you know, a few balls from the back, you know, Spurs were trying to play it out from the back and players were passing it short and we were almost able to intercept it. Things like that in terms of chasing, you know, the players down and putting pressure on them was great. But when it came to the telling moments, especially in that second half where we're starting to put pressure on, trying to get back into the game, he just didn't necessarily have that telling moment. But there was one moment in the game, the balls come out to him on the edge of the box. I think there was a few options, you know, either side of him, but he's decided to have the confidence to take the shot himself, which he rightly does have, considering he scored that great goal against Chelsea. And obviously he's tried to put it into the bottom corner, but Lloris was able to make a good save. And, you know, when you consider all the players in the box, you know, all you can do is just try and hit it on target. And if he had done it, you know, hit that shot a few inches higher, it probably would have gone in 1-1. Maybe it would have been a different story. But once again, it just goes to show that he is getting chances in the box, but he's just, you know, lacking that sort of telling moment, or that just one moment of quality, obviously, to make the difference. But overall, I do think, you know, obviously Wilfried Zaha's only had sort of a minor injury, so he should be back for the Man United game. And certainly Christian Benteke should be back in the near future, maybe late December or even the new year. So hopefully that will allow Townsend to play more in his natural position. And hopefully, I do pray that we do change our formation, because I do think if we do that, it will obviously improve our overall attacking sort of chances in the game, but also it will obviously affect and improve players like Townsend because they're playing in a better, more natural position. But overall, I do think a 6 is a fair reflection of his performance. So now I'm going to move on to the final player in our starting 11, and that is of course the striker Jordan Ayew, who I'm going to give a 6 overall for his performance. Now, as I've already mentioned with Townsend, in the fact that because Zaha was injured, we obviously had to change the way we set up, and that obviously meant that Townsend moved back to playing as a striker. Now, of course, Jordan Ayew was the main focal point of our attack, because normally Zaha is the main striker, and maybe someone like Ayew or Townsend will play off him. But obviously, in this case, Jordan Ayew had to be that main man up front, and obviously he was the main sort of replacement for Wilfried Zaha. Now, much like what I said with Townsend, I do think he worked really hard, and I do think as a partnership they've got great work rate. But obviously, you know, and because they obviously forced Spurs into a few mistakes, that was of course great to see. But much like what I said with Andros Townsend, is the fact that yes, they can work hard, yes, they've got good work rate, they've got good ethics, and they're very good at, you know, putting pressure on the opposition, but they just lack that sort of telling quality. And, you know, like what I said with Townsend, in the fact that when he got into the box, he obviously had a shot, and yes, it obviously forced the keeper into a save, but maybe you could argue he should have done better with that chance. The same could be said for Ayew. Yes, he didn't get that many chances in the game, but maybe he could have done better in an attacking sense. Now, in terms of, you know, his performance as a whole, obviously the team's performance was much improved, and as I said, you know, we've played Arsenal, Chelsea and obviously Tottenham recently. I would say out of them 3 games, albeit the Arsenal result was the best in terms of the draw, but actually in terms of performances, this game here was the best, and certainly of these 3 games, I think Ayew had his best game here against Tottenham. And the fact that he was lively throughout was what we've seen recently, but the fact that he was able to combine that with a much more improved performance on a personal note, obviously we've got to give him credit, because obviously that was great to see. Now, of course, as I said already, some could argue I was a bit generous giving him a 6, but I personally do think his work rate, his commitment, that was all great. But like I've said, the downside was the fact that he didn't obviously react quick enough when Cruyff headed in the opening goal. And obviously that's mainly because he failed to jump, or he just failed just to at least make a challenge to obviously stop Cruyff, the defender getting on the ball. And obviously it just allowed him a really easy goal from close range. Now, obviously the delivery into the box from Tottenham wasn't that great, and obviously we were able to clear that ball. We obviously headed it clear, but obviously the ball's found its way to Cruyff in the area, and rather than are you at least trying to get in the way of Cruyff, or trying to just block him, or trying to at least just jump and actually try and head the ball, rather than just standing there watching it thinking you can get your body in the way. Just, jump up, head it away. Rather than doing that, he just stood there and watched it. And actually, if you look back at replays of the goal, you can see Luca, as soon as the goal's gone in, absolutely just shouting down the ear of Jordan Ayew, giving him an absolute bollocking, because even though you're not a defender, you've got to do your basic work there. Yeah, and I talked about Van Aanholt. People could say, yes, maybe he should have done better, but the fact that Ayew just stood there, done nothing. It's not even like he tried to jump and he missed the header. He just stood there, and yes, that was disappointing. You could argue I maybe should give him a 5 for his performance, but like I've said, yes, it was a bit disappointing to do that, but we never really do expect to beat Spurs. So if you said before the game we'd lose 1-0, put in a good performance, I'd say that's fine. I'll take that, because we rarely do beat Spurs. But actually, having seen the nature and how we conceded a goal, in the fact that we made a clearance, albeit not the best, and then the ball comes to a young defender in the box, a relatively easy block to make. You literally just stand there, head the ball away. Rather than doing that, Ayew's just stood there, and even if he hadn't tried to head it, just getting in the way of it, he obviously didn't do that, and that was the thing that was really disappointing. And I can understand why people were quite angry with him, thinking they absolutely hate him. But I do think if you put that aside, it was a relatively good performance, and maybe I was a bit generous giving him a 6. But I do think when you consider all things together, the fact that he worked hard and actually formed quite a good partnership with Townsend, albeit it was ineffective in terms of end product. But yeah, that combined with the fact that he was obviously put in a much more improved performance than in recent weeks was obviously quite impressive. But like I've said already, yes, we didn't really expect to win this game, but after the good defensive performance we put in, and considering how good we played throughout the game, it was obviously disappointed to concede the goal from a corner. And obviously it was even more disappointing in the fact that the way it happened, the fact that Ayew could have been easily avoided if Ayew had at least made a jump, or at least made a challenge for the ball. Now I'm going to move on now to the subs now. Obviously Martin Kelly, Jeffrey Schlupp and Alexander Soloff all came on for Tompkins, Meyer and MacArthur. Now just to start with Martin Kelly, obviously came on for Tompkins in the 59th minute. And as I've already mentioned, obviously Tompkins had some sort of knee injury, and hopefully it's not too serious. Roy Hodgson thinks it might be a bit of bruising, or maybe a bit of just tenderness, from maybe overstraining it. So hopefully that isn't too serious. But Martin Kelly came off the bench, and at this point I'm thinking, when Tompkins went off last year, we went on to concede that goal. Obviously Harry Kane scored in like the 89th minute. So of course we were all expecting to lose at that point. Mainly because even though Martin Kelly is a very good defender, it's just the fact that when Tompkins went off last season, it seemed to affect us and we seemed to concede. And actually, even though Kelly replaced Tompkins just as he'd done obviously last year, the fact that he still made a fair number of good challenges to keep us in the game, and the fact that he also, because he used to play as a right back, the fact that he's got that ability to drive forward, we saw that in the latter stages of the game. He'd pick up the ball from the back, and rather than just passing it and trying to just have really slow build-up play, he'd actually run 20-30 yards to get the ball up the field. So of course that was great to see. So the fact that he was combining his defensive work by making a number of good challenges with the fact that he was helping us to push forward later on in the game was obviously great to see. And like I've said, when you consider how well Tompkins performed in the game, coming off the bench, I do think he matched him in terms of performance. We didn't go down in quality when Kelly came on. He kept it quite standard, and basically, last season he obviously took a bit of time to get into the game, whereas here, as soon as he was on the pitch, he was in the game, in the zone. And like I've said already, even though Tompkins played so well, I do think Kelly played just as well. And I do think, 7 overall, when you consider he was as good as Tompkins was on the pitch, and the same with Saka. I think they were, in terms of performance levels, I think Kelly was up there. So I do think a 7 overall is a fair result. And there was obviously, he made loads of good challenges and was pushing us forward, but there was one superb recovery tackle in particular, right in injury time, right at the death, and that was obviously to deny Songman him. So the fact that you know, Kelly was able to come on the pitch and just do, you know, your general defensive works and carry on where Tompkins left off. But the fact that he was also able to make that superb recovery tackle to obviously stop someone like Son, who always seems to score against us, the fact that he was obviously able to do that was of course great to see. Now in terms of Jeffrey Slapp, obviously he's come up for quite a lot of criticism recently, but actually his performance here, coming on off the bench for Max Mary in the 67th minute, I actually thought he put in a fairly good performance, and considering he's been fairly lacklustre and fairly disappointing recently, I actually thought he put in a fairly good performance, and I do think he deserves a 6. Now of course he came on to play on the left hand side, and I talked already in the fact that obviously Meyer was playing out of position, and that's why Meyer didn't really play that good. But actually bringing on Jeffrey Slapp was the perfect thing, because it meant that we could keep the formation we've been playing, but it had a player who was more suited to that role. And certainly we did see that in terms of our attacking play, in the fact that when we had a natural left-sided player, it did seem to help us and, you know, made us more effective going forward. Now I do think he got forward really well, and that's mainly because of he's got that pace and he's more suited to that left hand side. He was able to get down that left hand side really well, and something that we haven't really seen from him this season, and certainly seasons gone by, is just his crossing ability. Whereas in this game here, coming off the bench with 1-0 down, pressure on us, and the fact that he was delivering a number of good crosses into the box, you know, trying to at least get something into the box so that someone could at least have a chance from the end of it. The fact that he was doing that was of course quite interesting. Now, like I've said already, it was a much better performance than he has had in recent weeks, and the fact that he made an impact coming off the bench, it was really quite impressive. And the fact that he was actually looking to put balls into the box rather than just coming off the bench just to make up the numbers and just to give us fresh legs, the fact that he was actually looking to put balls into the box, looking to be proactive and looking to try and get us back into the game, that was of course great to see as well. Now by all means he wasn't great, and certainly I gave Meyer a 6 because Meyer was quite ineffective. Yes, Jeffrey Slapp didn't have any major impact on the game, but the fact that he still came on and he was better than he has been previously, and the fact that rather than just being a number like he's been in recent games, the fact that he was able to make an impact by putting balls into the box was of course quite great to see. Now in terms of our final sub, obviously Alexander Sorloth came on from MacArthur in the 70th minute, and as you can see, a theme of our subs is that they're getting earlier and earlier, so it's good to see that Roy Hodgson is finally taking it on note, that rather than being reactive for us conceding goals, actually be proactive, go out there, make changes to obviously try and influence the game. And although we conceded the goal way before that, I think he was quite proactive in the fact that even though it was after the goal, there was still quite a lot of time left of the game to make an impact. So I do think bringing on Sorloth from MacArthur, certainly changing up the formation a bit and moving Townsend out wide. Obviously I talked about that improving Townsend's performance, but actually having that tall physical presence and target man up top seemed to improve us, and for that reason I'm going to give him a 6 overall. Now of course we were chasing the game at this point, so obviously he was given just 20 minutes just to try and make a difference, and actually he was involved in quite a number of our attacks. Now I talked about Jeffrey Slapp putting balls into the box. Someone like Sorloth was just as important in the fact that he was getting involved in the attacks, getting into the box, and obviously he was the target for these crosses coming into the box, so in that respect he was obviously, you know, doing what he was meant to do. Now of course he had one big chance, and people are going to talk up loads and loads about this. Personally for me, looking back at it, you know, yes, Hugo Lloris makes a good save, but maybe he should do better. But you know, throughout the whole game we didn't really have any chances you know, inside the box, and actually this was the first time a Palace player actually found themselves clean for a goal throughout the whole game. So throughout the rest of the game we didn't really have any chances, and players weren't necessarily in the box in the right positions. But as soon as Sorloth comes on, who finds himself in a position which no one else has been in the game, and he does all the right things in terms of taking a touch and obviously drilling it towards goal, but maybe for me he should be looking to either put it a bit higher so Hugo Lloris wasn't able to save it, or he should be putting more power on it and trying to put it far post and, you know, put it away from the keeper, because I certainly do think that was a great chance in the 90th minute to draw us level, and people saying he should do better. Yes, he should do better, but given the circumstances and given the fact that Hugo Lloris made the save, it's sort of 50-50 for me as to whether just put all the blame on him. But it just goes to show that actually, why do we have someone like him on the bench where we're playing an unorthodox or two unorthodox players up front, whereas someone like Sorloth comes off the bench who's a natural striker and he makes that impact by getting into into the box. And yes, he didn't finish the chance, but the fact that he was actually in the area really just sort of begs the question for me why he isn't starting when we haven't got someone like Zaha or Benteke, because in that his sort of little cameo there, he showed that he's able to get into the box. And, you know, if he can just improve his decision making, maybe to take one less touch, or maybe just to, rather than striking it straight at the keeper with power, put it a bit higher or put it into the far corner, if he can improve that, then certainly I don't have any problem with him going forward. But like I've said, he probably should have scored it, but the fact that he was the only player to find himself in such a goal scoring opportunity or such a goal scoring positional game, you know, you've got to, you know, put a bit of blame on him, but then also don't put too much on him, because he at least took the chance, whereas other players in the game didn't really take their chance. But my final point really for him, and the reason I've given him a 6, is that I've seen enough in this performance here for him to warrant him starting in 2 weeks' time. And whether Zaha's fit or not, if Zaha's fit, he plays up top alongside him, and if Zaha still isn't fit, he plays up top there with Ayew, because I do think as a partnership they did work really well throughout the game. Now, in terms of just my overall summary of the game, you know, the result happened again, and I think, you know, obviously people think, oh, we always lose 1-0 to Tottenham and, you know, we get used to it, but actually it's a new Premier League record. You know, I think it's 5 games in a row now against Tottenham in the Premier League where it's finished 1-0, and I think that's the longest run of any Premier League matches against teams where they've actually finished with the same scoreline every time. So it just goes to show that, once again, Palace making history for the wrong reasons, but once again it always goes to show that, yes, it's not the great that we always lose against Spurs, but actually it goes to show how closely contested the matches are, in the fact that they're always very close encounters. Now, of course, you know, loads of people are going to moan and groan about the game, and obviously the result isn't great, and we're now literally level on points with teams in the relegation zone. Obviously that's not great, but the fact that we still put in a decent team performance without Wilfried Zaha, bear in mind, and the fact that we still ran Tottenham very close, is obviously that's a thing that we've got to take some sort of pride from, because, you know, we always know, people always mock us the fact that we're a one-man team, and yes, we don't necessarily play that great without Wilfried Zaha, but the performance here showed that we can play good and we can put in a decent performance, but we're just not as clinical and then we are obviously with Zaha. So of course people will moan and groan, but what you've got to consider is that even without Wilfried Zaha, we still put in a good performance, and I certainly do think that if Zaha had been playing, a few of our attacking opportunities or a few of our counter-attacks, maybe something different would have come from them. But of course, you know, you're always going to have that negativity surrounding the fan base, obviously, before kick-off when your star man's not playing there. But the fact that all of the players on the pitch still put in a shift, and the fact that they were running, you know, we ran Tottenham very close in this encounter, like we've done in previous seasons. The fact that we took it really close, even without our talisman, really just goes to show that actually maybe it's not as bad as we think it is. Even though the result isn't good, actually the performance was good, in the fact that we still played well without obviously our best player. Now obviously it does say something about your performance when you actually force the opposition, like Tottenham, who have got the quality to do, you know, to do wonders, when you force them to take the ball to the corner flag with about 4 minutes of the game to go. And obviously it's not the first time Spurs have done that, but the fact that we forced them to obviously take the ball to the corner to see the game out really just goes to show how well we were playing, because obviously Tottenham realised that we could attack them, so they just take the ball to the corner flag. So that just goes to show, or it does say something about the opposition and about your own team's performance when the opposition do that. But really, my final points is the fact that even though it was a better performance, it's once again defensive mistakes costing us, and just that lack of a cutting edge up front. You know, the performance was good, I suppose the defence as a whole was good, but it's just that defensive mistake from that corner. If Jordan Ayew tries to block the shot, at least just gets in the way of it, or just headers it like he should have, and just, you know, got off the ground, just put his body in the way of it, that defensive mistake cost us again, and of course that lack of a cutting edge up front. Now of course these performances are great, and it's good to see that we've matched Arsenal, we've managed to match Chelsea for the majority of the game, and the fact that we've managed to match Tottenham, obviously that's great, but we need to try and get something from Man United. You know, if we play like we did against Tottenham and Arsenal, we might be able to get something from Man United, and considering they're not playing that great this season, maybe there's a chance there. But the 6 games after that, you know, we've got Burnley, Brighton, West Ham. They are 3 very crucial games, and we at least, if we don't get anything from Man United, we at least need to get 6 or 7 points from them 3 games. It's going to be really crucial. You know, Burnley and Brighton teams around us, and West Ham just above of us. So these are teams in and around us that we need to be getting points from. And certainly if we perform like we did against Tottenham, like Arsenal, we might have a chance in these games, and obviously Man United including that as well. But if we cut out these defensive mistakes,
play like we did defensively and have that cutting edge up front, then maybe we'll have a chance going forward. And certainly I can't, highlight it enough. These games are really important and really crucial going forward. But my final really point is that yes, it was another good performance at home, but it ended with no points once again. So of course we could dwell about it for the whole season, saying we've performed great, we probably deserve more. But what we've got to do now, we've got to be proactive about it. We've got to go on the training ground, put in the work, and make sure that in 2 weeks' time against Man United, rather than having a performance where we play good but we still lose, just put in a performance and do it for the whole game and put your bodies on the line with tackles. Make sure every time you get a chance in the box, take these shots. We need to make sure we do that so we can at least come away with, from the game against Man United with something. But really for me, it's just that lack of goals, like I've said already, the fact that we haven't got that clinical edge, that lack of goals really continues to be a concern. But the fact that there were a number of positives to go into the international break was of course great to see. And I suppose the main thing for me, aside from the performance on the pitch, the fact that it was one of our best atmospheres this season at Selhurst, even without the home South fanatics. The fact that we've seen the atmosphere, especially in the R48 with the drum and stuff, the fact that we've been able to see that upturn in the atmosphere, getting it back to how it usually was, that was of course great to see. And when you consider the awful sort of conditions with the rain and with the really, really bad weather, the fact that we were still able to put in that sort of vibrant atmosphere was of course great to see, and hopefully that will help us and that will carry on into the next few weeks with obviously us getting behind the team. And like I've said, if we can continue putting in good performances like this, then hopefully the results will come.
So I'm now going to move on to my Man of the Match award, but before I do that and give you my Man of the Match and who I thought the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now, as you probably heard at the end of the player ratings, in the fact that it was a performance where, yes, we defended really well for the majority of the game, but actually going forward we were quite wasteful and weren't necessarily that great in the final third. So in that respect, it was a game where we sort of had a defence, or I suppose the defensive part of our game was good, and obviously going forward we weren't that great. And of course, once again, much like what has been the theme recently, it was just one little defensive mistake which cost us to concede a goal, which we went on to lose the game from. So in that respect, you've got to look at it and go, it's not ideal, but actually the performance wise, other than our attacking play, was outstanding. I do think our defensive work, stopping people like Harry Kane, was very good, excellent even. And of course, in the midfield, I think, and certainly a few players I'm going to mention, I do think in midfield we were relatively good as well. But I just thought I want to put that out there, that even though we lost the game, and of course it's I'm like a broken record, I say the same things week in week out, and the fact that it's a good performance, but once again didn't take our chances in the final third. We get punished by a defensive mistake. That was a theme once again. But actually, going back to that, how good the game was in certain parts of our play, obviously is why these players I've picked on this shortlist, they were basically quite crucial to that. So in terms of the 4 players I've gone with Aaron Wan-Bissaka, Mamadou Sakho, James Tompkins and Cheikhou Kouyaté. Now Aaron Wan-Bissaka, this guy never really seems to fail to impress me, and once again I think he's on like his 7th, maybe even 8th Man of the Match shortlist of the season, which just goes to show how good he's playing in a minute. Now of course he made his debut against Spurs last season, so I suppose you could say it was quite a big moment for him, going back to the club that he actually obviously first had his Palace start against. So maybe that was some sort of something maybe playing on his mind. But once again, like he always does, he impressed. And the thing I really liked is the fact that not only was he obviously making a number of timely challenges to obviously stop Spurs when they were going forward in what was overall once again another superb display from him, but actually he was making massive runs, fantastic runs up and down that right hand side. And obviously whilst he was going forward, he was obviously maintaining that sort of that check, let's say, on the amount of threat that Tottenham had. So not only was Wan-Bissaka having a superb display in the fact that he was making all of these fantastic challenges to obviously stop Spurs and people like Dele Alli, Harry Kane, not only was he doing that to stop people like that, but also he was actually making these very impressive strong runs up and down that right hand side. Not only obviously, like I said, to do his defensive work, but actually to go forward as well and just offer us a threat going forward as well. So for me, the reason he's on this shortlist is obviously because of his defensive work. And like I've said, our defensive performance was very good. It was just our attacking play which wasn't that good. But like I've said, Wan-Bissaka, great contribution to our defensive performance, and certainly
was quite key to us playing so well as we did defensively. Obviously Mamadou Sakho, and I'm probably going to repeat quite a lot for James Tompkins as well, but I do think Mamadou Sakho playing in that heart of the defence. Yes, there are a few sort of heart in mouth moments where he may have carried the ball forward too much, or he may have sort of given a short pass to Hennessy. If you put them aside, it was actually a very competent, very strong defensive performance from him, and the fact that he dealt with someone like Harry Kane, I think he scored 4 goals in 4 games before the Palace game. So when you've got someone like him, who we know is threat anyway, but someone when he's in that sort of form and has got that sort of stats, the fact that someone like Mamadou Sakho is able to defend so well against him was fantastic to see. And actually, if you look back at the goal, there wasn't actually any fault for me personally on Sakho. So you've got to look at it and go, if you put the goal aside, it was actually a very strong defensive performance from Sakho, and that's why he's on the shortlist here, because of how well he dealt with Harry Kane, but also just his overall defensive play. Now, much the same could be said for our third player, obviously James Tompkins. Like I said already, with Sakho, I thought both of them at the back were very solid, and I do think the thing that sort of made Tompkins even better is the fact that not only was he solid at the back, but also he had a couple of opportunities from set pieces at the other end as well. Now, of course, we'll be looking back at these and going, actually maybe he should have got that on target or not, but the fact that he's getting on the end of these set pieces, albeit they're not going on target and we're basically going to be left ruining these missed chances, still the fact that he's getting on the end of set pieces has got to be a bonus. But like I've said, I do think I could sort of say similar sort of things for Sakho and Tompkins, in the fact that the reason they're on the shortlist is just because of how well they did defend, and it just goes to show that the first 3 players on this shortlist are defenders. Really just goes to show how good how good our overall defensive performance was. But like I said, I can't really stress it enough that actually, aside from the goals, both Sakho and Tompkins had great performances defensively, were very solid, and obviously Tompkins himself went off injured, and I do think that was one of the game-changing moments. Yes, Kelly done alright when he came on and came off the bench, but I just think that maybe if James Tompkins had been there, maybe we might not have conceded that goal, which we did. And we go back to last season when we ended up conceding the goal when Tompkins went off, so maybe there's a reoccurring theme there. Now, the final player on our shortlist, on my shortlist, is Cheikhou Kouyaté. He's someone who's been here quite regular over the last few weeks, because I thought he's been one of our better players in recent games. Now, of course, playing alongside Milivojevic in the middle of the park, I thought that was a very solid base, and like I said with the defence, one of the reasons we played so well defensively was because of the defence, obviously, but actually the sort of line of the defence, in front of them, the defensive midfielders in front of them were also very key, and I think Kouyaté played his role in that. And the thing that I really liked about his performance, and the reason he's on this shortlist, is just how combative he was in midfield. The fact that he was always trying to win balls, the fact that he was trying to win the ball back if he gave away, the fact that he was always trying to sort of drive Palace forward, the fact that he had that sort of combative nature of his play was of course great to see. And like I've said already, even though he was given that line of defence in front of the back 4 alongside Milivojevic, yes, he was playing quite deep and was providing that defence, but the fact that he also tried to get forward as much as possible and obviously support Palace whenever he tried to get forward, not only obviously support the attacks in terms of getting the ball to them, but the fact that he also carried the ball forward was of course very impressive as well. And like I've said, there were actually a couple of moments where obviously we're sitting quite deep and actually he just made surges forward from deep, carrying the ball 20 yards or so, and that sort of commitment, that sort of combative nature of his play was obviously quite impressive. And the main thing for me, and the main reason he's on this shortlist, is that even though Milivojevic played well in midfield, just that sheer work rate that Cheikhou Kouyaté had, and the fact that he just drove us forward, is the thing that really did impress me, and is the reason he's of course on this shortlist. But for me personally, I do think there is only one winner here. The fact that I really can't fault him for anything throughout the game, and when you consider you can't really blame him at all for the goal we conceded, I'm of course going to give it to Aaron Wan-Bissaka. So congratulations, Aaron. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was another solid performance from you. But the thing for me really that just made Wan-Bissaka just above the edge is, like I said, above the others rather, it's just the fact that the amount of challenges he won, the fact that he kept Spurs quiet, and also the fact that he combined that solid defensive work with making these fantastic runs down that right hand side. The fact that he'd done that was obviously quite impressive. And like I've said, yes, Kouyaté and Sakho and Tompkins were good, but I just think Wan-Bissaka was just on another level with the amount of blocks he was making, with these amount of challenges, whilst also keeping Tottenham's attacking threats in check. But like I've said, you've got to give credit to Sakho and Tompkins. I thought they defended really well and really solidly at the back. And then of course Cheikhou Kouyaté,
And like I said already, because we were playing quite deep, trying to absorb the attacking threat that Spurs had, Chucky Karte was essentially a line of defence playing in front of the back four, just giving them that extra protection, and I thought he'd done it really well. So obviously all these players do deserve the credit, but Aaron Wan-Bissaka wins this week's Man of the Match award. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my Man of the Match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson and Wayne Hennessy following the game.
Wayne, must be really disappointed in the dressing room, especially as it looked like it was a great defensive performance for so long.
Yeah, our heads are down at the moment. Obviously played really well, but as I said, that one opportunity and they take it, and that's the story we've got at the moment, and we've got to deal with it.
Disappointing from a set piece, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. That's a couple now, so we'll be working it over international duty now, so hopefully we'll get that sorted and be good at set pieces.
How does this one compare to the Spurs game last season? It feels pretty similar in the way it went, but the goal came earlier.
Yeah, like I said, I wasn't busy at all, where last season I was, but like I say, they get that one chance and they take it, and that's the problem at this moment, especially in this league. They get their chances, they take it.
There's a great chance for Alex near the end. Do you think it was in when he received it there?
Oh, I thought it was in 100%, and like I said, fantastic save, and like saying that's the problem at the moment. Things are not just running our way.
But do you feel like confident that there's a good run in this team that coming soon?
Yeah, definitely. We've got some fantastic players in that dressing room. Team spirit's brilliant. Like saying it's just a little bit of luck that little bit of cutting edge that we need, and I'm sure that will turn around quickly.
It must be frustrating, Roy. You're probably coming in here with a similar script to a number of games this season.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, it's pretty much like the game here last year as well, where a late goal that time won it for Tottenham, but it was a really good effort, I thought, from the Crystal Palace players. I thought we held our own, more than held our own, for large parts of the game, and towards the end I thought we were looking close to getting the equaliser, which maybe we even deserved, but we didn't get the equaliser, and as a result we lose the game.
Is that a consideration that's been going on, the fact that the lack of goals puts pressure? They're taking their chance, you're not taking yours?
Well, that's just a fact of football life, isn't it? I mean, you don't have to be a football man to know that the game is won in both penalty areas. You know, it's what your goalkeeper and defenders do in one penalty box and what your forwards do in the other penalty box. That's what decides everything, because the game is about goals. So there's no doubt that if you aren't scoring them, you know, you're going to have to be very, very good at the other end to make sure you don't concede any. But I don't think that Tottenham created that many chances against us today. I think if anything, we probably had more actual goal chances than they had. But of course they defend well too, just like we do. So it's not easy to get that really clear-cut chance where you think we have to score here, because even when you get half a chance, their players are working very hard to try and put the guy who's shooting off or to get a block in.
It's not a psychological thing, it's not down to a lack of confidence, it's just bad luck?
I don't know whether, luck's a strange word, isn't it? I mean, I don't know that we probably haven't got as much composure as we would like, but then, we're chasing things all the time. So when you're chasing, you don't have quite the same composure as when you're well in command and you feel the game's already won. But I've got to say, I didn't think that we were much less composed or passed the ball much worse than Tottenham Hotspur today. And of course, Tottenham are a Champions League team, and they're going to be playing against the Barcelonas and the Inter Milans of the world. And I think that to give them the type of game we gave them today is a great credit to the players. And I really cannot fault anything. I can't fault the players tactically, and I certainly can't fault their effort and commitment. But it's frustrating or disappointing or any other of those adjectives that we all use these days to be standing here once again at the end of a game where, apart from very, very small margins, I could have a big smile on my face instead of looking very, very glum and very dejected.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson and Wayne Hennessy had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Tottenham. But make sure to come back in 2 weeks' time for my post-match review of the game against Man United. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.